Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive on grit. We're tackling Angela Duckworth's Grit, the power of passion and perseverance today. You want the cliff notes, the cheat sheet, the inside scoop? We got you. Think of this as your express lane to understanding why grit's having a moment, and more importantly, how to actually build it yourself.
And what makes this book so fascinating is that Duckworth doesn't just talk about success in a vacuum. She goes deep on the nitty-gritty of what it takes to achieve those big goals we all have. And her research, let's just say it throws a major wrench in that hole. You're either born with it or you're not. Idea about talent.
Right, like that whole nature versus nurture debate. And speaking of upbringing, Duckworth gets pretty personal in the book, right? She talks about how her own father, someone she really admired, used to tell her she wasn't a genius. Not exactly a confidence booster, huh? It's like we've all had those moments where someone we looked up to kind of doubted our potential, and it makes you wonder, were they right? Did they see something we didn't?
Yeah, you almost get the sense that experience really fueled her research. It's not just an academic exercise for Duckworth, it's personal. And what's interesting is she didn't immediately become this grit guru. Consulting at McKinsey, then teaching it, almost makes her more relatable. Like she understands what it takes to hustle and achieve success in the real world.
And that teaching experience is huge. She saw firsthand how some kids, even naturally gifted ones, they just plateaued, didn't reach their full potential. And then there were others who had to work at it, who maybe even struggled at first, but they blew past expectations.
And that's where her work at West Point comes in. She studied cadets at the U.S. Military Academy specifically, who made it through Beast Barracks, this notoriously grueling summer training program, and who dropped out. Turns out, grit was a stronger predictor of success than their SAT scores or even their physical fitness levels. Think about that for a second. Sticking with something, not giving up when things got tough, mattered more than so-called natural talent.
It's almost like she found a hidden key, right? And it wasn't just at West Point. This grit factor kept popping up everywhere she looked, from predicting high school graduation rates to even understanding the success of Army Special Forces.
Yeah.
It was like Duckworth stumbled onto this secret sauce for achievement.
Right. And she makes a really compelling case for why we need to rethink this whole talent obsession. Duckworth argues that focusing so much on innate talent can actually backfire, leading to what psychologists call a fixed mindset. Basically, the belief that your abilities are set in stone, unchangeable. And that kind of thinking, it can really hold you back, make you want to just give up when things get hard.
It's that whole "if it doesn't come naturally, why bother"
Oh, wow.
mentality, right? But Duckworth's saying, hold on a minute, that's not the whole story.
Exactly. And the book is full of stories about people who defied expectations, people who weren't considered prodigies, but they achieved some pretty amazing things. Take Duckworth's former student, David Luong, for example. He struggled with math early on.
Really? Struggled how? Like, just not his thing?
His teachers even told him he wasn't gifted in math. Imagine hearing that.
Oof, yeah, that's rough. Especially at a young age.
Right. But what did he do? Did he just give up and say, well, I guess math isn't for me? Absolutely not. He got extra help from his teachers, put in the time and effort, and he ended up excelling in calculus. He even went on to study at Swarthmore College. Talk about proving those early assessments wrong.
That's incredible. Talk about a growth mindset in action.
Exactly. And that's what Duckworth's book is all about. She's offering this powerful alternative to the fixed mindset. It's this idea that talent, or at least our capacity for it, can be developed through hard work, dedication, and learning from our mistakes.
So it's not just about having this vague sense of determination. Duckworth actually breaks grit down into two main components: passion and perseverance.
Think of passion as that deep, unwavering interest in something, that thing you genuinely care about and you're willing to stick with, even when it gets tough.
And then perseverance is what? The engine that keeps you moving forward, the fuel for that passion.
You could say that. Perseverance is all about not throwing in the towel when you hit those inevitable roadblocks. It's that ability to bounce back from setbacks, to learn from your failures, and just keep going.
It's like that saying, it's not about how many times you get knocked down, it's about how many times you get back up.
Exactly. And these two components, passion and perseverance, they work together, they feed off each other. Your passion fuels your efforts, and perseverance is the engine that keeps you going when the going gets tough.
So you're saying it's not enough to just be passionate about something. You also need that relentless drive to see it through.
Right. A great example of this is Jeffrey Gettleman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He'd always dreamed of becoming the East Africa bureau chief for the New York Times, a pretty prestigious position, wouldn't you say?
Definitely not an easy gig to land. It's not like they just hand those out to anyone.
Absolutely. Gettleman was very intentional about his career path. He took strategic steps to gain the experience and expertise he needed. He started small, writing for his college newspaper, doing internships at smaller publications, and then worked his way up to the Los Angeles Times. He put in the work.
So it wasn't an overnight success story. He had to climb the ladder, so to speak.
Exactly. And there were definitely bumps along the way, detours, setbacks. He even got rejected by the New York Times initially, but he was persistent. He didn't let those setbacks derail him, and eventually he landed his dream job.
It really highlights what we were just talking about, that grit isn't about instant gratification or some magical talent. Gettleman's story shows that it takes real dedication, a willingness to adapt and overcome challenges, and yeah, a whole lot of hard work.
And that's a perfect example of what we'll unpack further when we talk about this idea of deliberate practice. It's not just about doing what you love, it's about pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
Deliberate practice. I like that. It almost sounds like a workout routine, but for your brain.
It's kind of like that, but we'll dive into all the details after the break.
So it's about being really intentional with your effort, not just going through the motions.
Exactly. It's about pushing your limits, identifying those areas where you need to improve, and then designing practice sessions that specifically target those weaknesses.
So less winging it, more training montage, like in those sports movies.
Exactly. Duckworth uses a great analogy in the book. She talks about this world record-holding magician, David Blaine. He's known for these crazy feats of endurance, like spending days submerged in water or hanging upside down for hours. And he's very open about the fact that his abilities aren't some kind of supernatural gift. It's years of relentless, focused practice.
Right. He's all about pushing his physical and mental limits to the extreme. Like that ice block thing, insane.
Exactly. And he talks about how he prepares for these stunts. It's like training for an Olympic event. He meticulously plans out his training, even designs custom routines to get the exact physical and mental adaptations he needs.
So it's not just about practice makes perfect. It's about smart practice, right? Deliberate practice.
Right. And this idea isn't just for elite athletes or performers. It applies to anyone who wants to excel at anything, whether it's writing, playing an instrument, or even mastering a new skill for work.
It makes you think about those times when you're so engrossed in something that it feels effortless, like you're in the zone. Is that a form of expertise too, even though it doesn't feel like practice?
You're talking about flow,
Yeah.
that state of total absorption and effortless concentration that psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi has written about extensively. It's that feeling of being so completely immersed in what you're doing that time seems to disappear and you're performing at your absolute peak.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like when I'm writing and the words just seem to flow out of me, it's a great feeling, but it doesn't always happen, right?
Right. And there's actually some debate about whether flow is something you can achieve through sheer effort, or if it's more likely to occur when you've already reached a certain level of mastery through, you guess, to deliberate practice.
So maybe it's like all that hard work, all that focus practice, it lays the foundation for those flow moments to happen more frequently and maybe even more intensely.
That's a really interesting question. And
Yeah.
it's something to think about. How much does deliberate practice contribute to those moments of effortless creativity and peak performance?
Definitely something to ponder. But shifting gears a bit, Duckworth also argues that truly gritty people are often driven by something bigger than themselves, right?
It's like they have this inner compass that guides their actions, this deep-seated desire to make a real difference in the world, to contribute to something larger than just their own personal achievements.
It's like they're playing on a team, even if they're the only one on the field.
Exactly. A perfect example of this is Kat Cole. She went from working as a Hooters waitress to becoming a top executive in the restaurant industry.
That's quite a journey. What fueled her rise through the ranks?
Well, she was always willing to go above and beyond. She started at Hooters when she was 18 to help her mom pay bills. And one night, the cooks didn't show up. The restaurant was packed, and she was thrown into a very stressful situation.
Wow, talk about pressure. What did she do?
She didn't panic. She didn't back down. She jumped in and learned how to cook the food, kept the whole place running smoothly.
Talk about a growth mindset moment.
Exactly. And it wasn't a one-time thing. She kept taking on new challenges, learning every job in the restaurant, even training other employees.
So she basically embodied that grit philosophy without even realizing it.
In a way, yes. And her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Her manager saw her drive and determination and quickly promoted her. She eventually became a vice president at Hooters and then president of Cinnabon.
That's amazing. From Hooters waitress to Cinnabon president. Talk about defying expectations.
And her story highlights the power of purpose. It wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder for her. It was about making a difference, using her skills and experiences to help others succeed.
It's like she found that sweet spot where her passions and talents intersected with a larger purpose.
Right. And that's a really inspiring takeaway for all of us. Finding that sense of purpose, that why behind your actions, can be a powerful motivator for developing grit and achieving things you might not have thought possible.
It's like that sense of purpose gives you the fuel to push through those tough moments, the setbacks, the failures. Speaking of failures, how does grit factor into those inevitable bumps in the road? How do we bounce back from those?
That's where hope and a growth mindset become absolutely
It's
crucial.
hope, as in like optimism, believing that things will get better.
Exactly. Duckworth talks about the work of psychologist Martin Seligman, who studied this phenomenon called learned helplessness. Have you ever felt so defeated after repeated setbacks that you just wanted to give up?
Oh, absolutely. It's like that feeling of being stuck in quicksand. Every time you try to move forward, you just sink deeper.
Right. And Seligman found that people who are more optimistic, those who have a more hopeful outlook, they tend to interpret setbacks differently. They see them as temporary and specific, not as permanent roadblocks.
So instead of thinking I'm a failure, they might say, okay, that didn't go as planned, but I learned something from it and I can try again.
Exactly. It's about focusing on what you can control, learning from your mistakes, and maintaining that belief that things can and will get better. And that's where the growth mindset comes in.
So how does a growth mindset tie into hope and resilience?
A growth mindset is all about believing that your abilities aren't fixed. They can be developed through effort and learning. So when you hit a setback, instead of seeing it as a sign that you're not good enough, you see it as an opportunity to learn, grow, and improve. And that's incredibly empowering.
It's like turning those negative self-talk tapes off and replacing them with something more encouraging and constructive.
Exactly. And here's another interesting tidbit from the book. Duckworth talks about research, showing that even experiencing manageable stress in adolescence can actually make you more resilient as an adult.
Really? So those awkward teenage years, those challenges, those heartbreaks, they actually make us stronger in the long run.
It seems that way. It's like building mental resilience muscles early on.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've talked a lot about individual grit, but Duckworth also explores how grit thrives in groups and organizations, right? It's not just a solo mission.
Absolutely. She uses the example of Pete Carroll, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. He's known for building a winning culture, and he's very intentional about cultivating grit within his team.
So it's not just about recruiting the most talented players. He's looking for something more than just raw athletic ability.
Exactly. He emphasizes things like competition, perseverance, and having a shared passion for the game. He fosters an environment where hard work, resilience, and a never-give-up attitude are celebrated.
And it clearly works. Under Carroll's leadership, the Seahawks have been a dominant force in the NFL, known for their toughness, their come-from-behind victories, and of course, their Super Bowl win.
And it all goes back to that idea that grit can be contagious. Carroll created a culture where grit thrived, and it had a ripple effect on the entire team.
It's like that old saying, teamwork makes the dream work. So how do we take all these insights about grit and apply them to our own lives, especially when it comes to raising kids who are resilient, determined, and passionate?
Well, Duckworth talks about this rule she uses in her own family called the hard thing rule.
Okay, the hard thing rule. Lay it on me. What's the Duckworth family secret?
Well, it's not really a secret, more like a family operating system. There are 3 parts to it. First, everyone in the family picks a hard thing, and yes, mom and dad too, no slacking.
I was going to say, the parents have to walk the walk, right? But we're talking about like chores, or is this deeper?
Deeper for sure. It has to be something challenging, something that needs daily, deliberate practice, like we were talking about before, but applied to life skills, hobbies, anything really.
So I'm picturing piano lessons, maybe training for a marathon. What's rule number 2?
Rule 2 is big. No quitting just because it's hard. That's kind of the whole point. Sticking with it even when you want to throw in the towel.
Got to build that resilience. All right, what's the catch? There's got to be a catch to rule 3.
The catch is it has to be your hard thing. Duckworth's big on this. The kids get to choose. It's got to be something they're genuinely interested in, something they want to put the effort into. Otherwise, it's just punishment, right?
Makes total sense. You're teaching them to challenge themselves, but in a way that aligns with their passions. Okay, I have to ask, how do her kids handle this? hard thing business.
She's really honest about it in the book, talks about the eye rolls, the negotiations. It's a constant balancing act, being supportive but also holding firm to those high expectations. It's not always pretty, but the takeaway is it's about finding that sweet spot between pushing your kids and letting them lead the way.
And that goes back to what we were discussing earlier about grit not just being an individual thing, right? It's about the environment, the people around you.
100%. Duckworth talks about this idea of grit contagions, that grit can spread from person to person within families, schools, even entire communities. She uses the example of Jeffrey Canada and the incredible work he's doing with the Harlem Children's Zone.
Oh, I've heard of them. They're doing amazing work breaking cycles of poverty through education. How does grit tie in?
Canada himself is like the embodiment of grit. He's dedicated his life to helping kids from disadvantaged backgrounds succeed, and he's created this whole culture of grit within the organization. High expectations, but with tons of support, resources, mentoring the whole package.
And it's working, right? They're seeing incredible results. Kids graduating high school, going to college, breaking barriers. It really shows that grit isn't just some abstract concept. It can be fostered, nurtured, and it can have a real, tangible impact on people's lives.
Right. It's about creating these environments where effort is celebrated, where perseverance is valued, and where having a growth mindset isn't just encouraged, it's expected. And that's something we can all strive for in our own little corners of the world.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into grit, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that grit isn't some magical quality that you're either born with or you're not. It's a skill, a set of habits, a way of approaching challenges that can be learned and developed.
And it's not just about achieving some grand external measure of success. It's about becoming the best, most resilient versions of ourselves.
Perfectly said. And it starts with that simple question. What's your hard thing? What's that thing you've been putting off, that dream you've been too afraid to chase? Maybe it's finally writing that book, learning a new language, training for that marathon.
Whatever it is, I hope this deep dive has given you the tools and the inspiration to go after it with newfound grit. Remember, it's not going to be easy, but that's kind of the point. Embrace the challenge, believe in your ability to grow, and never underestimate the power of passion, perseverance, and a healthy dose of hope.
And who knows? Maybe by embracing our own hard things, we can inspire those around us to do the same. And that's how we start to build a world with a little more grit. One challenge, one triumph, one step at a time.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into grit. Until next time.